Hello and welcome back to this surprise episode of the Silmarillion Film Project. I'm your co-host Dave Kale, broadcasting to you live on June 7th, unbeknownst to most of the listening public, apparently. Apologies for snafu. We announced that we were rescheduling, but then forgot to update the GoToWebinar link, and hence we have deprived ourselves of our wonderful many of our usual regulars.
Exactly. Whom we neglected to remind.
For the podcast listeners, like, what surprise episode?
Exactly right. Yeah. It's the next episode in line. What's surprising about that?
Or if you're prone to conspiracy theories, then what you think is that we've done this to eliminate any dissent from the decisions.
That's right.
We're gonna make.
That's right. We're going to make super controversial decisions today, so we needed to make sure no one was here to contradict us. Yeah, that's it.
That's right. Yes. If you're listening carefully, you probably hear that I'm joined as always by my other co-hosts, Corey Olson, the Tolkien Professor, and Trish Lambert, the Tolkien Maven.
And in case you get Corey and I mixed up, I'm Trish.
Important distinction to make.
Yes.
Yeah. So
here we are, along with not too many other people.
Not too many other people. Yeah, it's like the pressure's on us.
Great. Well, we do have folks on Twitch too, and actually the Twitch broadcast going live will send the notification out to a couple thousand people, so that will help to remind folks as well. Anyway, so very good. So today's episode is I have decided I absolutely love the new way that we're doing our seasons, where we're interspersing these creative sessions, the creative content direction sessions in between our episode plot discussion sessions. What I love about this is like the total license for digression. These are like our digression episodes. But no, seriously, like the creative challenges, like the creative and artistic challenges, and interpretation challenges of thinking about these particular worldview questions, which are gonna be relevant, to the stuff that we're talking about, and what's gonna happen in the different episodes. I think this is. This stuff is super cool, and I really enjoy talking through it. Our goal today is we have a couple questions that we're gonna discuss, sort of some very specific issues that arise in this season that we need to think our way through a little bit, and then we're gonna talk about casting. We're gonna go through some of the characters that have not yet been cast, and we're gonna talk about their characters, what we would look for, right? If we were actually putting out a casting call for actors and actresses, what would we want to see in these, for those characters? So that is the plan for today. But first, a couple of announcements, and we have one really big one, which is related to Film itself, and those of you who are on the discussion forums will already have heard this. But we have a time change for those of you who listen to the show, who tune in with us live. We have a major change. We are shifting it 12 hours backwards because we have to make a major change. Trish is not available anymore in the mornings, and it's actually something that's going to work out better, I think, for all of us. Dave will no longer be broadcasting at the crack of dawn out in California, and in some ways it'll be easier on me too. So anyway, we decided that the change had to be made. So we're, instead of broadcasting anymore on Fridays at 10 a.m. we'll be broadcasting on Thursdays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I know that the number one negative impact of this, which I deeply regret, is the fact that our Europeans who often join us for some film live are not going to be able to, I won't say aren't going to be able to. They're perfectly welcome to join us at like 3 o'clock in the morning, but I know that that's not the optimal time for a broadcast over on the other side of the ocean, and I apologize for that. I wish it were possible to do it at a different and more Europe-friendly time. It's one of the things which has been such a struggle for me, actually, for many years. I mean, ever since I've started to do any kind of live things. Since the first time I've tried to do live stuff from my podcast, one of the biggest difficulties has always been trying to, meet at times when we could when we could connect with folks in Europe. It's very difficult. It's very challenging because, of course, evening time is best for most of the Americans, and for my personal schedule, not only evening time but late evening time. In fact, Halstein, that is possibly an upside, right? That it's so late in the evening time that it's almost early morning in Europe. Those who are past the UK, so those of you who are out in Germany, Sweden, places like that, yeah, it's gonna be 4 a.m. right? So just get up a little early and you'll be able to make it. But anyway, as I say, joking aside, I know it's difficult, and I'm really sorry to make a move which is going to de facto exclude some of our regulars, and that was a really hard decision to make, but it had to happen. That was the thing that we had to do, and so we're sorry about that, but that's what it is. And hopefully, there will be some people who couldn't make it before who will be able to make it before. So, anyway, so that's where we are. So this is the schedule. And we're kind of having a monkey with the schedule anyway because of Mythmoot coming up and everything. So our next session after today is going to be 2 weeks from today on the 20th of June. Thursday, June 20th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time will be our next meeting. And then we'll do our next one 3 weeks after that. We'll get back on our regular 2-week schedule because we'll be skipping over the week of Mythmoot and then the week of the 4th of July here in America. Thursday night is the night of the 4th of July itself. So we will be... again, on the 11th will be our next meeting, the 11th of July. So June 20th and then July 11th, and then we're back to our normal 2-week, function. So, all right. Anyway.
So Hakon is promising occasional surprise appearances. So
occasional
that's awesome,
surprise appearances. Okay, that's good. That's good. Now, hey, I admire morning people. Like the idea of waking up at 4 o'clock for something I can't even conceive of it. I could stay up until 4 o'clock, but I couldn't wake up at 4 o'clock.
I was gonna say that's like a bedtime for you.
Yeah, exactly. And it often happens. It often happens that like right before I go to bed, the Europeans who work at Signum get up, and so like I'm chatting with them, and I'm like, it must be late if I'm already chatting with the Europeans. Yeah. But anyway, all right. So the other announcement, of course, is Mythmoot. We had we prevailed upon our venue to give us an extra week to give them our final numbers. So that means we were able to extend the registration deadline for Mythmoot up through this coming Thursday. So next Thursday, the 13th of June is the new deadline. And that's it for live registration. So if you want to come and join us, if you're going to be able to come join us, even just for a day, I encourage you to do that. It's going to be wonderful. Trish and I will both be there this year. Dave can't be there, but Trish and I will both be there. And I think Nick and Marie will both be there as well. They usually both are able to make it too, which is fun. Anyway, so
let me ask you this, Corey.
Yeah.
How old do you think Wally needs to be in order to have reached the point where he might appreciate it?
Well,
I mean, 2.5, I'm pretty sure.
2.5 is a little low, I think. Yeah. My family was there last year. Actually, my kids didn't attend the whole time. My wife and kids were sort of around, but they were kind of doing other stuff around the DC area most of the time.
Yes.
But it's one thing that. It's like a frontier we've never really explored yet at Mythmoot, which I would be interested to do, actually. I'd be interested to expand to some, like, more child-oriented programming. I think that would be really cool, but we have never done that. So, yeah, our youngest attendees have been teenagers, basically, to this point. So, yeah, I think Wally's probably got a little bit of time to go, Dave.
All right.
Before he will really enjoy it. He'd probably endure it. But but he'd probably make your life miserable.
We'll take it year by year.
Yeah, exactly. Year by year. Anyway, so Mythmoot deadline extension until the 13th of June, but don't forget, of course, Mootcast is open and will be open right up until, in fact, through the event, through Sunday the 30th. You can sign up for Mootcast, and everyone who comes, even for a single day, gets the full Mootcast and the archived recordings of all the sessions and everything that comes with registration. So, all right, yeah. So there's that, and was there anything else I was meant to announce? I don't think so. I think that's it. Okay, cool. Yeah, that and the time change. Great. All right. Our first issue today, Magic Swords. Okay, so we're going to be reforging Ringil in the first episode of the season when we had the breaking of Fingolfin's sword, and we're going to be reforging it here. So we will also have Telkar forge Narsil later on in the season. How do we want to depict these scenes? Is the making of magic swords solely smithcraft with a forge and fire, or is there some singing involved? Is it private and secretive, or something you can do in front of others? How does the smith's intent shape the blade? Eöl's black swords are a negative example, but there are positive examples as well. How do we show this? And what, if anything, is special about swords forged by Noldor or dwarves? Okay, so great questions. One thing that is, I think, pretty clear from the way that swords are described, magic swords are described in Tolkien, is that there clearly is. We were talking about this in Exploring the Lord of the Rings quite a bit when we were in the Barrow Downs and thinking about the Barrow swords and looking at, Frodo's sword flashing with red fire and stuff when he has the ring on facing the Nazgul at Weathertop and stuff. So what is it about these swords? What is a magic sword in Tolkien exactly? And it seems to me that it's the Barrow swords in the Lord of the Rings, I think, make it clearer than anywhere else. They are wound about with spells for the downfall of Angmar. The will and intent of the and of course we get a glimpse into this in The Return of the King, right? When Merry's sword is destroyed, and the narrator tells us that happy would he have been who forged it long ago, right, to know what its destiny had been. That those who make these swords invest it with some of their own will, right? The will of the smith is somehow conveyed into the sword, has something to do with the sword. So like the dude who made those swords or those daggers or whatever they were, those blades, let us say more generically, that were put into that were taken out of the Barrow by Tom Bombadil and distributed to the hobbits. He was specifically focused on fighting against the Witch King and against Angmar. And so therefore that power was in the swords. There is clearly something like there are spells, right? That word is used, right? So that's, that suggests words, right? That there should be words involved, either words carved, and this, of course, is also very common, that there are runes, right? Remember that that's what Aragorn and Glorfindel are looking for on the hilt and blade of the blade before it melts, right? Of the knife that stabbed Frodo. Glorfindel says there are evil things written on this hilt, and I assume that just doesn't mean just rude words and stuff like that. Like the evil things written on the hilt are not just casual insults in the Black Speech or whatever, but obviously evil runes, evil spells that empowered that blade, or even possibly created that blade. I'm not even sure it was actually a metal blade myself, but But anyway, the Witch King's weapon that stabbed Frodo. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, so yeah, words are involved, spells are involved, the will of the smith is definitely involved. So how do we want to depict these scenes with the elves and with the dwarves? Is there going to be a difference between how elves and dwarves do it? And let me say that the one part of this that seems... Sorry,
that seems like that should go without saying. Like, I think we definitely want them to be different somehow.
Yeah, we definitely do want them to be different somehow, I think. Not obviously totally different. I mean, no. What they're doing, I mean, they're both forging, right?
Yeah.
They would be, dwarves would do it secretly.
There's a T-shirt for you.
Dwarves do it secretly. Dwarves do it secretly. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it's a dog toy. Sorry, guys. I have myself on mute, but when I want to talk, then I've got this background of squeaky toy. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a nasty one for the post-production team.
Yeah.
Yeah, just edit that up.
Anyway, yeah, so I would think that the dwarf, if there's... Remember that one of the things that I was talking about before was, when we were talking about dwarf culture previously, was I was a little bit resistant to the idea that dwarves are completely secretive about their forging. Like that, I kind of like to think that there's a more active, like mentor thing, like, you know, that dwarves who would like to teach what they know to those who come after them. They might not want to share it outside the family.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I don't know that it's secret among themselves, but it certainly would be secret to other. I got a question.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask this now. Maybe we need to just wait for it later, but I'm going to ask it. So I was thinking, actually, when I thought about magic swords, I was thinking about the Hobbit and the troll cave, you know, and this whole bit about the blades turning blue in the presence of orcs. I would think that would be almost like an assembly line enchantment of swords at this time, because of the fact that that's why you would make it, right? Because you want to know if orcs are nearby at this time with Morgoth and fighting. And I mean, I would almost think that's kind of like, we need 100, you know, orc swords. Right. You know what I mean? I mean, I could see like a whole, like a forged line of these guys chanting, you know, over their sword. I mean, to me at this time, those kind of swords would not be rare.
No.
It seems like they would be common.
Yes.
That type of sword. Now there would be other magic swords that would have other things, but
yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. It seems like artisanal enchanted swords wouldn't be practical.
Right. Well, yeah.
Artisanal swords.
Right. I mean, so I'm thinking, well, one question that I would have, is there such a thing as a sword made by the Noldor, which hobbits, for instance, would not consider a magical sword? Like, can they even make non-magical swords? Is that possible?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean,
I'm not
this
sure
very
they
well
can.
may be like
No,
just their normal, just a Noldor normal sword, right?
Yeah, that's what it means.
Yeah, that's true. That's certainly consistent with the fact that basically everything elves do is perceived as magical.
Right, true. And the blue thing, turning blue with orcs, would just be sort of the baseline. That's like just an everyday sword would do that for the Noldor, you know? And then everything else above, like Tony's kind of saying, royalty, nobility, specific warriors would get like a, you know, upgraded type sword.
Right. And this, I mean, certainly there would be like swords of particular power, right? Something that someone took much care over, or maybe even, this gets back to a discussion again we were having in Exploring the Lord of the Rings. As sooner or later we will have all of the discussions in Exploring the Lord of the Rings. But one of the questions, it is one of the questions that came up lately was, what exactly is the difference between good guy magic and bad guy magic? Like, can we generalize about that? What are the trends that we can see? Differences in how, like, Sauron operates and how Gandalf operates, for instance. Yeah. And one of the things that we were pointing to is, and this is very visible in the Silmarillion in particular, is that there is the obvious trend of the bad guys to distribute themselves, right? To dominate others by pouring part of themselves into those others, right, in order to build their build their power through these other things which they control and kind of make into extensions of themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And that does seem to me to be an intrinsically dubious an intrinsically dubious undertaking. And by the way, as a little spoiler, because it's relevant to this question, not spoiler exactly, but because it's relevant to this season and this question, that's my answer to why Anglachel talks, by the way, is that Eol puts himself, like Eol does to his swords, not quite what Sauron does with the Ring of Power, but it's in the category, right? It's not nearly as much, not as extreme, but he puts so much of himself into his swords that his own, like, part of his own dark will, his own dark spirit is in there, and that's why it's sentient. That's why it can talk, because it has the will, more of the will of
which is of course
Eol.
Which is, of course, ironic because Eol's not exactly a notorious chatty guy.
Right, yeah. Well, it's not chatty, right? It doesn't talk often. It only talks the once.
Actually, Eol may have made it so that it would keep him company, They could have conversations.
I can't imagine him.
In the evenings.
I'm kind of lonely. I'm not gonna make like a robot companion, because that would just be creepy. No, I'm gonna make a sword that can talk to me, because that's better. Yeah. Now
I do think named swords. So this, this baseline. And by the way, don't forget the sting was actually a dagger. So we have, basically weaponry, right?
Yeah.
Those would not be named, but there would be named swords, and I would think the named swords. I think, like Tony was saying, Glamdring is certainly not going to be your standard sword. It's going to have something special about it. So named swords to me would be maybe the distinction.
Yeah. No, I mean, that certainly would be one of the things that would be a marker of that kind of thing. So as you can see, what I'm coming back around to is, what then is it that elves are doing, right, when they make a sword and it has power in that? So where does the power come from? And I don't want to get too literal about this, like as if we're picturing it has to be charged up from a battery or something like that. But there has to be some mechanism, right, of the power that is in the blades. Marie was just saying that, elves who are aware of the whole domination of will thing take great pains not to influence others' wills. And Maria's connecting that to the go not to the elves for advice, for they will tell you both no and yes, right? They don't even want to sort of influence things that way. And I agree that sort of that works for me. But a sword, right? So Fingolfin forging Ringil, there is a sense in which he would put something of himself into it, right? Mm-hmm. Like his own cold determination to oppose Morgoth would be sort of infused into the sword, but it wouldn't lessen him, right?
Right.
In the way that, because he's not distributing himself.
Well, the difference there is
I'm
domination.
Trying to establish the qualitative difference.
Is the dominate. Like the bad guys are like domination is their thing. So I could see that would take something out of themselves. Whereas I don't see that with the elves. That's
Right.
because, to your point, or to Marie's point, that's not what they'd be infusing their weaponry with. Yay, nay?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that makes sense. That like where the diminishment of Morgoth and Sauron comes in is not in the making of things, right? It's not the R&D, that diminishes them. It's them putting enough of their will in others to enslave them, right? It's the enslavement of others, that how much juice you've got to put in order to override the system, right? And dominate them. And I don't want to make it sound like it's just quantitative. It's clearly a qualitative difference. Like it's what you're attempting to do. But if what you're doing with your will is not just making something, because I would think, I mean, elves are made to make things, right? I mean, like that's kind of their bag, right? So there's no way that the making of beautiful things, even of beautiful, marvelous, and magical things, would diminish an elf. It would increase. Like, surely an elvish smith who has made many wonderful and beautiful things over his life would be enriched by that, not impoverished by that, right? An elvish smith, after 100,000 years of wonderful creative work, wouldn't be empty, right? Wouldn't be used up, wouldn't be tapped out. It'd be the other way around, right? He'd be enriched by that, surely. I would think.
Sounds like this will be very straightforward to portray on screen.
Very straightforward. Well, I think we can get around to a straightforward portrayal. I'm not too worried about that. But yeah. So okay.
I always wondered. Quick question. That line about the Morgul blade, evil things written on it.
Yeah.
I always wondered, was that meant to be literal, like, here's the inscription right here, or sort of more metaphorical in the sense that, like, is what they're detecting the will of the maker,
right? Like that has evil written all over it, right?
Yeah.
right.
Right.
Which, always,
in Tolkien is still a substantive thing. It's
sure.
not like,
Sure.
But I always wondered, like, is he actually looking at a physical inscription, or is he sort of detecting sort of the evil intent of the maker in it?
I mean, both, I think, but I always understood that to me. So Glorfindel does say that, perhaps your eyes cannot see them. Right. So there, it's not like it's just like an inscription literally carved into the hilt of the knife.
Into it, yeah. Yes.
But
something in between sounds like.
Yeah, I would think it's probably is something that is like he can see something like runes, is what I've always imagined from that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if it has to be literal. I've always thought of it as like he's actually seeing runes which are there but which are not carved, so they can't see it, but he can perceive that they're present.
That feels right.
Yeah, it does. Right. It seems, especially since we know that, like, runes on swords, runes on weapons are a thing, right? I mean, we know that that is a standard approach. So, invisible runes on a knife with a vanishing blade seems, like that would be the tool for the job, right?
Yep.
But anyway, yeah. So okay. So if it's true, then, that the power that elves put forth in the making of things, and by the way, it's not just weaponry, obviously, that would be wonderful and magical, right? That elves would make. And this is a thing that we need to remember in general, right? Elves make not only beautiful things, but wondrous things. So what Glamdring is to a normal sword, an elvish, whatever, an elvish chair should be to a regular chair, right? If you see what I mean by that. I mean, I'm not saying it should glow blue in the presence of orcs. What I'm saying is that it should be marvelous to a similar extent as Glamdring. Now, it's possible, as we said before, named swords like Glamdring and Orcrist perhaps were above and beyond, right? Were a great work of a great craftsman, and so therefore not something that is, duplicable in any sword made by the Noldor. But anyway, yeah, I would think that the vast majority of their works of hand would be magical. Yeah, as Marie says, we have the rope, right? The Elvish rope. We have the Elvish cloaks. I mean, it is in fact true that most of the things that and the boats, right? The boats, the cloaks, and the rope. We have 3 examples in the Fellowship of the Ring of just non-weapon stuff that is made by the elves, which hobbits would call magical, right? So it's a thing that is worth keeping in mind, right? Worth keeping in mind because this is something that we could, Tony, the Miravor to other drinks, Lembus, compared to the honey cakes of the Bjornings. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see all of this stuff, right? Hakan, that's a really wonderful way to think about this. He talks about Elvish craftsmanship being allowed by Eru, or I would go even further than that, Hakan, and say being part of Eru's creation plan. Remember, Eru was a delegator from day one, right? It was through the Song of the Ainur that he designed the world, right? That he caused the world to be, or at least he caused the world to be by saying Ea, right? But he made it to be as they shaped it, right? They were, to, pun semi-intended, they were instrumental in the forming of Ea.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
No, they are all weak.
And there's every reason to think that the elves and men are part of that as well, right? Part of that shaping of Arda, according to the creation plan of Iluvatar. So yes, he not only permits the craftsmanship of elves, it's part of the plan, right? He brings forth the elves in part so that they can, through their own subcreation, enrich Arda. That's like their job. So anyway, to continue Hakon's point, Sauron's creations, Morgoth's creations, right? The things that he does are contaminating Eru's creation. Yes, Morgoth is trying to hijack Arda, right? He's not trying to augment Arda. He's not doing his bit to bring about the enrichment of Arda. He's trying to hijack it and control it and shape it into something which just serves him and his own plans and his own desires, just as he tried to hijack the music with his clamorous unison, right, as of many trumpets braying on a single note. That's in the same way he's trying to not enrich, but whitewash creation and bring it under his own single will and make it over again, like in his own image and under his own command. So yes, I agree. That's a really important way to be thinking about this whole phenomenon. And so therefore, when we're thinking about Elvish craftsmanship in general and thinking about weapons in particular, we need to be thinking about that kind of art. Now, Marie, I think it was you who suggested that that we should have some exceptions to this, right? We should have some moments where like some of the elves cross the line and the kind of craftsmanship that they do is questionable, right? And the two most obvious examples of that, Marie, which I think you cited before, of course, Eol and possibly even Feanor to some extent. I'm a little leery about Feanor. I certainly would not want to make the Silmarils themselves an example of this. This is one of my... I've been a defender of the Silmarils for a long time, in the sense that I think the Silmarils get a bad rap. I don't think that it's not the Silmarils' fault. The Silmarils are not evil, right? The Silmarils don't cause destruction. Don't hate them because they're beautiful, right? They are so beautiful that they create desire. The problem is that folks don't know how to handle their desire, right? They're the problem. It's not, it's kind of like, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, like Silmarils don't cause wars. People who lust after Silmarils cause wars, right? Like it's not the Silmarils' fault. So anyway,
but Feanor makes plenty of other things.
He does make plenty of other things. Unfortunately, the only two other examples of things that we can point to super clearly are the Palantiri and the lamps. The lamps seem a little bit hard to warp in that particular way.
Doesn't he? But he also makes lots of swords. And
he does make weapons. Yeah, exactly. Helms and weapons, armor and weapons are the other things that we know of for sure. We could invent
the wonderful
something.
The wonderful thing about an adaptation is we can invent new things for him to make and then show what we want.
Now, I was going to suggest that, but I don't know if it's too late in the day for us to introduce something that is like and anyway, if we introduce something that's going to be like a whole new kind of plot line, we could run off the rails super quickly doing that. And we've already banned the Palantiri. So,
true.
Yeah.
But what about his children?
Well, Curufin could make some dubious stuff. It would be interesting because we actually don't have... Is there any evidence? I'm trying to remember any references, and I can't think of any in the published Silmarillion, to Curufin making anything. We're told that Curufin, inherited the bulk of his father's skill, but yet we're never told Curufin makes anything. I can't remember any famous thing that Curufin made that's named. Yeah. So Celebrimbor, Tony, is kind of what I was building up to there, and I agree with you and with what Ellen said before about the Rings of Power being sort of shady, dubious. Yeah, and of course, they're nothing but dubious because they're done under the influence of Sauron. I mean, no, Sauron's hand never touched them, but that doesn't mean they were a good idea, right? I mean, they still, it's still something that Sauron suggested, and for not benevolent reasons, right? So yeah, I agree. I think the Rings of Power are really sketchy. However, I do think that it would be kind of interesting to, so on the one hand, we could have young Celebrimbor making something, but I think it would be sort of interesting to have Curufin make something dubious. Yeah. And because that gives us a chance to have Celebrimbor learn from it, both in one way or another. Yeah, exactly, Mithluin. The only artifact that I could think of too that was connected with Curufin was Angrist, which of course he didn't make. Yeah. So yeah. Anyhow, I don't know that we necessarily. I mean, I don't see us. We probably shouldn't go too far outside of the plots that we've been discussing, but it's something to kind of put in the back of our heads, I think, if there's some other dubious artifact, and we don't have to invent a random artifact. It could just be a sword, right? Sorry, I'm suddenly thinking of my mind is running over the Celegorm and Curufin plot in Baron and Luthien, and I'm thinking in particular of the bow, that they shot Baron with, that they try to shoot Luthien with, right? And end up shooting Baron with. I'm just like thinking of things used by Feanorians, right? I'm just like any artifact I'm running through my head, and that's the one thing I immediately came up with there. But
that's a nice idea.
Yeah.
Especially given the questionable use to which it is later put.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, let me not range too far afield here. Back to the general question. Fingolfin forges Ringol. I would definitely want him to reforge his own sword. And is there singing involved? I think there almost has to be.
I think there would be. Yeah.
I think maybe that could be one clear difference between how the Noldor do it and how the dwarves do it. Right? The dwarves could not sing. Right? They could all just be about the carving of runes, and the elves could be about, the singing of songs of power that are then sort of woven around their blades. Yeah, Hakan, exactly. Fingolfin should be singing a song about the Helcaraxa while he's smithing. Absolutely. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Wait a second, I just had a complicated idea.
Uh-oh.
Just had a complicated idea. And I'm going to blame Marie. Marie mentioned, when I was brainstorming about stuff that Feanor made, she mentioned off the cuff that he would have likely made his own crown. And then I was thinking about Fingolfin wearing Feanor's crown, the crown of the High King. And then I'm thinking about Fingolfin's rashness in attacking Morgoth. And if some of the Fey spirit of Feanor in the crown could have influenced that. No evidence in the text of anything of the sort, but I just like that chain of things. Like the idea of Feanor crossing over the line and putting some of his spirit in that like morally dubious way, that more, it's something more like what Sauron and Morgoth do. And if there's anything like that, would have had to be something that he forged post Death of Finwë, right? Like after he'd crossed the line, after he refused the Silmarils to Yavanna, right? It would have to be later on, and the crown would fit that, right? He forges his own crown after his father's death, and the fellness of his spirit is involved in that. It would have been anyway. And then, of course, I was immediately thinking, well, Fey, right? He is his own Fey rush to towards death in attacking the Balrogs, and then Fingolfin. Anyway, I don't know how much or if anything we would want to make of this, but and I wouldn't want to make it like Fingolfin is being possessed by the spirit of Feanor. We can't make it look like that, and we can't make it, so we might want to just avoid this entirely. I don't know if it's something that would really work well or not. But anyway, it just popped into my head there. So maybe we can just kind of put that on the back burner and see if we might want to do something with that. Hakan, I was thinking of that too, just like when Fingolfin attacks, right? As we show Fingolfin riding, right, towards Angband, to challenge Morgoth, having like some of Feanor, like a version of Feanor's music playing in the background, right? Like Fingolfin's theme gets sort of corrupted by Feanor's theme, right? And the Fall theme, as well. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, something to think about as we move forward there.
I like this very interesting discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So dwarves carve runes. That's where the source of. Okay. All right. Well, hang on a second. This though contradicts what I was thinking before. What I was thinking before is that when it comes to secrecy, dwarves would be eager to pass on their skill at metalsmithing, right? But maybe the imbuing of artifacts with power, there's something like that's really personal, right? So it's one thing to just like make a really good functional sword, and the techniques for like how do you make a good blade that stands up really well, like that's something that they would teach freely, maybe not freely to outsiders, but certainly freely among themselves. But for dwarvish craftsmen to basically, if there's going to be runes of power, or so, if there's going to be some power invested in this thing, that's personal, right? And that's something that you don't share with others, and that no one would ask, right? No dwarf would even think of, prying into the secrets of another smith for, what they do and how they do it. But of course, if they're carving runes, then anyone can see them. So like, how's that secret at that point? I mean, they could be invisible runes, I suppose, or runes that are visible only to the dwarvish craftsmen themselves. Yeah. Yeah, Hakan, you're right. I do think that, like a dwarvish master craftsman who is capable of creating, weapons of worth like that, would probably take a single apprentice, right? There would be like one single master-student relationship where they would pass on how they do what they do, right? Though it's still like the student would still probably not be able to just emulate exactly what their master did. Like they would have to find their own, like, I mean, I would think to the dwarves, it would be something about like, you have to, it's like about your own relationship with the metal, right? Like you have to it's like, it has to be the relationship between you and the sword. So it's going to be different for every person. It's going to be different even in a sense for every weapon. But yeah, yeah, Tony's saying, what if the runes are not carved but spoken? Yes, I could see that, so that there could be a spoken word element, a kind of a chanting, Mythluan, as you suggest. Yeah. Ithildine, visible only in moonlight or starlight. Yeah, something like that. We do have, of course, that we know that the dwarves really like that, right? Even if they weren't the ones who invented it. Yeah. Yeah, good. I could see that. Right? So that, I mean, the difference between song and chant seems a kind of a subtle one to establish the difference between Elvish craftsmanship and dwarvish craftsmanship. But I think the sound of that could be very different. The effect of it, certainly the effect of it on screen would be very different. So when we saw Fingolfin forging Narsil, and we saw Telkar forging... Oh, wait, sorry. I said it wrong. Fingolfin forging Ringil and Telkar forging Narsil, it would look and sound very different. And Eol forging Anglakhel. And I would think that if Eol's forging of his swords are sketchy, and even sketchy in the ways that we were talking about, more like the work of Melkor and Sauron than other Elvish craftsmanship, where he's not just putting the thought of the things that he loves, right? Which is, again, what we get from the elves of Lothlorien, right? When we're talking about the cloaks. We put the thought of all that we love into all that we make, they say. And that seems to me like a general kind of rule of thumb when you're talking about Elvish craftsmanship, right? Ringil would be a sort of power because he would be putting into it not just like stuff that he loved, not just stuff that he liked, right? He would be putting into it the memory of the crossing of the Helcaraxa, right? The memory of the suffering of his people, the memory of his own, his own desire to, atone for the wrong that he has done, and to lead his people in the right direction. Again, I'm thinking about the circumstance in which he broke the sword in the first place. All of those things would be for Fingolfin wrapped up in the forging of Ringel, the forging of this weapon against their enemy, for the good which he hopes to do. Yeah, exactly, Hakan, the love of his people and those who are lost, absolutely. All of those things would be put there. So there would be, it's one of the things that would make Ringo really powerful, and different in its nature, different in its quality. And I mean quality even in like the kind of thing it is, not the how good it is. It would be magic of a different quality than, say, the magic in the elven cloaks that that the Fellowship has, because it's not made in the same kind of spirit. Yeah, and Tony, I certainly agree. Things like the Morgul blades and things are imbued with with their own hatred and their own fear and their own despair. Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Good. Okay, so I think we're pretty good on this. Does that help?
I think that clarifies things.
I think so too. And actually, we could segue from this, because it's kind of the same topic, to the prosthetic.
Exactly. Right. So this does lead directly into this other question, which is a really fascinating little question. It's a sort of a minor thing, but to me, it actually opens a really big issue, actually. Okay, so the question is, most fan art depicts Maedhros post-Thangorodrim with a stump. Would we want to show a prosthesis of some kind? The Noldor are certainly clever enough to make something functional for him. Assistance with keeping a shield on his arm in battle would be useful, practically essential, and could be worn only when he's in full armor. Not all prosthetic limbs have to look like a pirate's hook or a robot hand. Exactly. Well, here's the larger question that this issue opened for me, and I'm not avoiding talking about the hand. We'll get back to it. But here's my question. What is the Noldor relationship with technology in general? And because here's the sort of additional follow-up question. A lot of us, I will say us, I will include myself in this. A lot of us are very quick to say things like Tolkien is not a fan of technology. But that's a very clumsy thing to say. Because, technology is a big word, right? And one cannot possibly maintain the premise that Tolkien was opposed to technology. He was not opposed to technology. He had nothing, he seemed to have no problems whatsoever with agriculture, for instance. The plow, the loom, the watermill. These are technologies, right? Actually quite advanced technologies that we see in this, globally speaking, right? Historically speaking, the watermill, the kind of advanced agricultural techniques. These are all none of which are things which Tolkien, it seems, would have any problem with, and which nevertheless happen all the time, right? So what exactly did Tolkien not like? But even more specifically than that, though, I want to think about elves and technology. What do we see with elves and technology? So when I'm talking about technology, please don't imagine that I'm trying to suggest a robot hand. I'm not suggesting a robot hand. But it becomes a question, like, so you're the Noldor, right? And exactly as is suggested on our slide here, the Noldor are very clever, right? They're wonderful at making things. But the question is not what can they do? The question is what would they do, right? I could easily believe that somebody like Curufin could possibly make something which would be like a hand, right? If they wanted to make a robot hand, it wouldn't be a robot hand, right? It wouldn't be operating on electrical impulses and stuff. But again, they make wondrous things that are magical. They can, as Robert Brown mentioned, like, you know, you can make diamond studs that won't come unfastened until ordered, right? You know, that fasten themselves and won't come unfastened until ordered. That's a thing, right? So, like, surely they could make. So I just like, what do they think? What do they? So you're the sons of Feanor. Well, some of the sons of Feanor. You're the 5 other sons of Feanor, and you're sitting around Maedhros' bed, right? Maedhros is unconscious, recovering from his ordeal at Thangorodrim, and there's his arm with the stump lying on top of the covers of his bed, and you're looking at it. What are you thinking? Are you thinking, we can help him with it? What help would he want? Like, to what extent would they think we want to make something functional for him? Is function a thing that they're interested in? Now, see, Ellen, I totally understand, Ellen, you're using the word machine, and that's an important word. But again, like technology, machine is also a big word. A wheel is a machine. You know, like a watermill is a complex machine. A loom is a complex machine. Okay, looms are less complex, but still, it's relatively complex. Those are machines. So, you know, a crowbar is a machine. So, I want to be careful. I want to be specific here. And I'm emphasizing elves too, because we know. This is going to be a really interesting question. Robert, wonderful. A mantle clock is certainly a machine, but even if we pretend the anachronistic mantle clock from The Hobbit doesn't exist, Robert, what do we do with the umbrellas? Exactly as you say, an umbrella is a machine, and a relatively complex machine. Anyway. There are lots of machines in Tolkien. The question is, where do we draw the line, and what machines are elves interested in or not interested in?
Also, are we automatically assuming it's a metal prosthetic? It could be wood, leather covered. You know, it could be leather covered wood.
Yeah, I mean, would their only thought be like just medical care? Right? Like, let's just make sure he doesn't get gangrene and then we're good. And then, like, you know, he'll learn to fight with his left hand as well as his right, and we can strap a shield onto his right arm and he'll be fine. Or would they be thinking, like, we want him to be able to do things with his right arm? Like, would he be like, hey, I'd really kind of like to still be able to, you know, pick up my teacup with my right hand. Can we do something here?
By the way, have we already decided he's going to have a prosthesis?
No, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Would it occur to them? Would they care?
Right.
Would they care? Yeah, Mithlu and I agree. I don't think they would just make him a decorative fake hand, like just a falsie. No. Right? That would be creepy, and I wouldn't think he would. I can't imagine Maedhros doing that at all. Right? Maedhros. My number one argument against a prosthesis of any kind, and I'm not saying that I am totally against prosthesis of any kind, but my number one argument against it would be he wants to be remembered, and he wants to remember, and he wants everybody else to remember. Like Maedhros he would not put a fake hand to be like, I'm
just like everybody else.
Exactly. I'm just like everybody else. Or I want people to look at me and not realize that I've lost my hand. Like, no, he would be like, you know, Morgoth, like, we have a Morgoth problem. Like, don't forget my stump over here. Like, I don't think
you could actually do a scene like that where somebody actually brings him something that they crafted for him, and he refuses it and
right.
says, no, I don't want this to be hidden. I want this to be a like a banner or a charge or an inspiration to, continue to fight the enemy.
Exactly. I don't think he would want to forget. I don't think that he would want to fake it. Yeah, exactly. I Maedhros is intent, right? Afterwards, he's focused, and yeah, but I return to the other question, because again, this is not just about Maedhros' hand. So forget Maedhros' hand for a second and think about the more general question. What is elves' interest in technology? They have some interest in it. You can't say they have no interest in technology. They farm, so they have interest in technology, right? They use tools. They have interest in technology. Like, tools means technology, right? So if you're going to develop tools and you're immortal and you're really clever, you have to stop somewhere for some reason, right? There's a reason we don't see the elves, driving around in internal combustion engines, right? Or better, flying around on like hovercraft and things, and like appearing and reappearing in TARDISes. Like, there's a reason elves don't do this, right? What is that reason? Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at. You see what I mean?
Alignment with Valinor, alignment with the Valar. If the Valar had wanted us to have that stuff, they would have given us, I don't know. To me, it would be almost philosophical, wouldn't it? I mean, aside from Tolkien's dislike of, okay, that's, but
even, I mean, so like, to some extent, I'm interested in Tolkien's dislike in that, I mean, obviously it informs it. But I'm less interested in that than in how it fills,
right.
Than how it fits in the
how it
world,
fit into
right?
the how it fits in the world.
Exactly.
I would think it would be alignment with the Valar. I mean,
right, but how exactly? So Ellen, I agree with you that when Tolkien did talk about the internal combustion engine and things like airplanes and bombs and stuff like that as being, he kind of associated those with like orcs and Sauron and Morgoth, like we have the goblins, right, inventing gunpowder and cannons and things like that, and bombs in The Hobbit, right? He alludes to that. We do have that general association. The question is why? If we think about it thematically, right, he is if we think about it thematically, in what way is it associated with Morgoth and Sauron? Obviously, bombs are like applying ingenuity in order to make better and better tools for killing more and more people. Is like, that's obviously not a good look, right? That's very Morgothian thinking, and that's pretty obvious, right? But why other things? In what sense? And I'm not saying that because I don't think there's an answer. I do think that there's an answer. And thinking especially, I've been reading a lot of early 20th century stuff lately. I've been reading a lot of G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis lately. And so one of the stuff that is kind of very much in discussion and in the air in, the first 4 decades of the 20th century is the increasing emphasis of applied science as an instrument for man's domination of nature, right? It's about domination, right? Humans are the lords of the world, and it is our applied science that will bring nature fully under our domination. That was a way that people were talking in ways that didn't make them feel uncomfortable back in like the 20s and 30s, right? That was a big issue, right? And yeah, and I'm not saying it's not still an issue, but I'm saying that in my mind, that's the common thing, right? If there's a common element, if there's a thing that they the elves would be resistant to, that's what I think it would be. They would be resistant to the use, the application of science. The word science just means knowledge, right? Learning about how, like, what things are and how they work. the application of knowledge, the application of science in order to dominate and control, that's the questionable thing, right? So, what kind of... exactly, Tony, the eugenics movement very much at the center of that, right?
Now, Brianna gives us a little bit of a different angle here. And one of the things I picked up on in what she says is when you have fewer generations, there's not going to be this sort of build up over time. You know what I mean? It's not, you don't have like the next generation with elves. I mean, I'm trying to think that through. I mean, you kind of have that with Morgoth too. So I don't know if it might just be not really applicable, but I thought about that. There's kind of an inertia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Well, okay. If we were to adopt that principle then, to say the reason elves don't carry on advancing technology in the direction of the modern world, right, which they have the wherewithal to do, and the time, I mean, they could do it far better than we, right, because they live for millennia, right? Yeah. So like one single cunning elvish inventor could, run the gamut, right, from like Gutenberg all the way up through Edison, right, no problem, eventually, right, within 10 millennia. I agree. I don't see any reason to think that they've done that. I don't see any reason to think they're interested in that. That didn't happen. My question is why? Why doesn't it happen? And I think it's important for us to figure this out, because we need, as Brie, as you were just talking about, warfare, they're very involved in warfare, right? They have they have as much motivation as anyone in the history of our world to improve their military technology in order to give them the best possible chance against Morgoth, right? So goodness knows there are going to be temptations for them to develop better and better and more effective weaponry, right? Why don't the elves ever set themselves to making magic bombs? Why does elvish technology never advance, even when there seems to be a need for it, right? Again, I'm not saying that it should. I'm not suggesting changing that at all. I'm just saying I want to make sure we understand why, because if we understand why, then we can apply that, right?
And it's not just limited to the elves. I mean, the dwarves don't do it, and they certainly they have the minds that would come up with it. The men don't. Think of the Gondorian. I mean, in the third age.
The men do, though. The Numenorians do.
Do they have like grons of their own and trebuchets and that kind of stuff? Or
no,
it seems like we only see
they have field pieces and cannons and airplanes and warships and like armored warships in the earlier versions of it.
That's true. Yeah.
Tolkien rolls back from that, right? But I mean, the original reason why Sauron surrenders to Ar-Pharazôn in the early drafts, the reason Sauron surrenders to Ar-Pharazôn is because all of his army runs away, and the reason all of his army runs away is that the Numenorians open up with their artillery, and the armies of Mordor scatter. This is why Sauron cannot fight. Like there is no way that his army can possibly fight the Numenorians on the battlefield. Now again, Tolkien rolled back from that. Right, the version that we see in the Akalabaith of the Numenorians, we are still told that, and he worked this out in a little bit more of a nuanced way in some of the Unfinished Tales stuff where he talks about the Numenorians there. But he's still, I think he's still kind of walking a fairly fine line there. Anyway, yeah. So the Numenorians, Marie, exactly, they're way more pro-technology than the elves. But again, my question is, why? Why are the Numenorians so much more pro-technology than the elves? What is it about the elves? And again, that one principle that makes sense to me is the domination thing, the domination of nature.
I think it's stewardship versus domination. Elves see themselves as stewards, where the Numenorians and also Morgoth and his guys are into dominating. I mean, I think that is the distinction we see whenever we see that And I mean, I don't know why, but Da Vinci popped in my mind. I mean, we think of him as being this great artist, but truthfully, he got most of his commissions doing war machines, right? I mean, that was kind of his big thing. So it just seems to me like, but I don't know how to, I mean, the other thing I was thinking is that actually needs to be obviously a very, very deeply rooted thing in the Elven culture so that it would never come up.
Yes.
Even in the Third Age, even when Sauron comes back, it would just never come up for them to do it.
Yes.
It has to be so like fundamental to their culture.
Yeah, there's a choice that they are making, right? They could advance their military. I don't doubt that they could make something like bombs if they wanted to, right? They could, but they don't. They don't ever go in that direction. They don't ever move in that direction. And it's exactly as you say, Trish. They would be so contrary to their worldview, right?
Right.
They wouldn't go there. And Robert, I think that's a really great point. Elves need to make sure that what they're killing is an enemy, right? Elves would not be okay with collateral damage. Even the kind of collateral damage, I mean, look what happens to the, I mean, forgetting even the, and of course this is a very Tolkien thing, forgetting even the loss of life, of human life at the Somme, think what happened to the land at the Somme, right? The horrible description of no man's land, which informed the Dead Marshes, and especially the horrible lands warped and twisted by war outside the gates of Mordor, right? That like the elves would not be okay with this, right? Just unleashing a weapon, which yes, is going to be very effective against the orcs, but is also going to destroy so many other things and lay waste to the land. Totally, they're not going to do that, right? Yeah, so stewardship, I think that's a really key word, Trish, and I think it's a really good thing to think about. That's
how do we show that, though? That's not like they're going to have a casual conversation about this with each other because it's so part of their nature. You know what I mean? It's like, do we even address it, or is it more in the backstory? Is it more kind of
that's why I'm kind of working this out, because it's in things like this, small things like Maedhros' hand, right? Where to me it comes up. Again, my question is not should Maedhros have a robot hand. I don't think he should have a robot hand. But the question makes me ask, why shouldn't he have a robot hand? Like why should, over time, why are they not developing more and more effective prosthetics for Maedhros' hand? And I'm not first of all, I'm not even necessary. I think I could be influenced almost in almost any direction about Maedhros' hand. Honestly, I don't have a strong stake in this, but it's, to me, the theoretical question is far more important. So if we think about it as stewardship rather than dominion, if that is the number one thing which informs Elvish technology, right, and the application of Elvish knowledge. One of the things, for instance, I would believe that this would mean Elvish agriculture would work very differently. Right? They're not going to remember the relationship that, yeah. No, this is another discussion we had in Exploring the Lord of the Rings. Why the hobbits
stealing our thunder.
Yeah, exactly. Stealing everything. Again, by the end of the time, there will be nothing we have not discussed in Exploring the Lord of the Rings.
I mean, he's going through sentence by sentence in Lord of the Rings.
The whole point of Exploring the Lord of the Rings is to discuss all the things. But anyway, we were looking at the passages where it talks about the antipathy between the Old Forest and the hobbits, right? The conflict between the Old Forest and the hobbits. And what we were pointing out, what we were talking about there is this is very simple. Like, the farmers and the forest can't be friends. Like, if you're a farmer, the forest is your enemy, the encroaching forest who is like, you've got to clear the land in order to farm, right? Elves aren't going to do that, right? Elves aren't going to clear cut. They're not going to burn forest in order to plant where the forest was, right? They're not going to even. I'm not even sure what kinds of irrigation they would use exactly, right? Again, I think it would be different. Bree, good. There's also the question of their relationship with the Valar and with Iluvatar himself and being stewards of the earth. No, definitely, definitely, they would see themselves in that way. So yeah, there are small things that we can. So like for instance, here's one other example. If when we show in Gondolin, I would think is where it would come up most, because surely the fields around Gondolin have to be cultivated, right? Because how else are they going to eat if they're not cultivating those fields? And there are plenty of fields to cultivate. But when we show cultivated fields around the city of Gondolin, I don't think the crops should be planted in rows. We should not see like the neat squares and rectangles and rows of crops that you see in normal human farming. Not only because they're not driving tractors, but again, I don't think that kind of things is that just kind of strikes me when I'm trying to imagine again this concept of this application of the Elvish cap on technology, taking the land and forcing it into a shape, forcing the plants to grow in these particular places. I would think that they would sing to encourage the crops, right? They would nourish and encourage the life in the wheat that they wanted to grow, right? But I don't think they would, force it into rows and everything.
I would think that they would create their agriculture to be ecological. In other words, they would actually have an ecosystem instead of like a field of one crop. That same amount of land they would actually fashion an ecosystem. In other words, there would be multiple crops. There would be, pollination by bees. There would be, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It would be like almost like an ecosystem kind of thing. I mean, I could see that being true to like Yavanna would do, right? This is something that Yavanna would, right, or she did kind of, but what they would be doing is kind of in cooperation with nature, cultivating certain.
Yeah. And I agree, Phil. I was thinking about weeds also. And how would you distinguish between crops and weeds? I would think, first of all, that you've got to think that elves would be a little bit less wholesale than human gardeners are in getting rid of weeds. Like those plants that we call weeds are like, they have their own function and their own beauty, right?
Right.
They are taking the nutrients from the soil and where you want your wheat to grow. But surely they could handle that kind of situation. I'm not sure exactly how they would do it, but I don't think they would.
Would weed even be a concept to elves?
Right, exactly. Not just weeding in the way that we weed, I wouldn't think.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So both Marie and Ellen are agreeing with you, Trish, about no monoculture.
Right.
There. Yeah. No, exactly.
And also one generation's weeds is another generation's, designer plant. So I think it's a relative term.
Right. No, I mean, you would think that the Elvish impulse would be to like appreciate the beauty and even the use of each plant in its own kind and for its own ways, right? So they certainly wouldn't have such a hard crop versus weed dichotomy in their minds, right? Anyway, I'm getting into agriculture here just because I'm thinking of illustrations, right? I'm thinking of examples of how Elvish technology differs. There's still technology there, right? Even magical technology is technology. Even if you are encouraging crops to grow with song, that's technology, right? That's right. What it means.
Right.
So,
actually, each species, what am I saying? Each race has its own relationship with technology, because dwarves are certainly technological, but not in the same way elves are. Yeah. So I think what we're doing right now is defining what is elven technology. And I think this whole being in harmony with nature, being stewards of the land, I mean, any technology that enhances that stewardship, I would think they would go after, but anything that destroys it, they wouldn't, basically.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes sense to me. So let's see. So then how would this then work? Thinking outside of agriculture then. We know elves weave, so they would not, because a loom ultimately is a tool, right? like a tool that is used for a craft. I mean, it's a machine, but it's a tool. I mean, all tools are machines, technically.
They're woodworkers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, we do have to be careful again. And this is a mistake I find people often making about elves. We can't be like, elves would never harm anything. Sure, they would. Right. What did they sit on at Woodall when the hobbits were visiting the elves? Answer: sawn trunks of trees is what they sat on. Right. So like that they cut down trees. Elves cut down trees. And, and yet they have need of wood, right? This is true of the elves as well as it is of anybody else. They make things out of wood, and not just dead wood. They carve stone. They hunt and kill animals. Yes, I mean we can't go to.
But I almost think of it as almost like in a Native American tradition. First of all, where they use all of the pieces of whatever, the tree, the animal, all that stuff. So they have bone implements or whatever. And the Native Americans, I don't know that every tribe did this, but I remember there was one, I think it was the Washoe tribe in California. They would actually had a ritual where they would apologize to the animal before they killed it. I mean, when they would go hunting, they would kind of commune with the nature of the animal and, this kind of, I mean, I'm not saying elves should do that, but I'm just saying there is a way to be that way in
yes,
harmony.
There is, it's as much about the attitude with which you do it as anything else.
Right.
Yeah. And
I mean, it was the Numenorians that actually laid waste to the forests in Middle Earth, right? For their shipbuilding. Is that right? Was the men.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the Numenorians. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, good. Maria's recalling, of course, Gimli's description of how the dwarves would shape Aglarond, how you can shape nature without dominating it.
Yes. I like that statement, actually, shape nature without dominating it.
Exactly.
Yep. Whereas Morgoth, I don't even know that Morgoth cares that much about nature, except it's how it can serve him, basically.
Yes. So another thing that someone, Ellen, maybe you brought up earlier was that the idea that the elves would not be very interested in labor-saving devices. That seems to me perfectly true. The example that immediately comes to mind: cunning elves who've lived for thousands of years could surely have devised a mechanism which would push barrels through a hatch automatically, right? Surely some elf could be sitting there pulling a lever and, advancing the barrels down the chute, right? But no, the elves choose to roll the barrels by hand over to the hole and push it down. Why do they do that? Because it's fun. They love rolling the barrels into the hole. They sing songs about it, right? They wouldn't be able to, I mean, I guess theoretically you could pull a lever and still sing the splash plump song, but they love it. It's fun, right? It's clearly fun. So that kind of delight, like they don't want to minimize how they interact with the world. Besides which, labor-saving devices are also for people who are short on time, right? I mean, if you're immortal, what do you care, right? I mean, if I were immortal, I probably would wash my dishes by hand instead of using the dishwasher too. I use the dishwasher because I got other things I gotta get done before I die, right? So yeah, I think that's, that both the urgency of labor-saving devices and even, again, just like the concept, I want to interact with my surroundings less, in a sense, right, is one of the things that informs labor-saving devices. I don't think there is bothered. Yeah. Yeah, Tony points out, and I agree, do we get a single example of an Elvish wheeled vehicle? Do we ever see an elf in a wheeled vehicle?
another example of a thing that seems like it would be pretty easy for them to come up with.
Oh, no question.
And would actually be of great utility on some of these long journeys.
Right.
Can easily see Arwen traveling between Rivendell and Lothlorien in a carriage.
Absolutely. Yeah, and yet no evidence that she did so, right? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, they don't seem to use wheeled vehicles. And again, my goal is here just to try to understand why. To try to if we can get a clearer sense of the culture here and the reasons they make the decisions that they do, then I think we will be equipped to answer simple questions like, what do they do with Maedhros' stump? They would not want to. So the number one thing I think has to be the stewardship versus domination thing, right? That's the number one rule. It's not even necessarily a rule. Like, that's the number one cultural fact about elves. Beyond that, I don't think that they would be interested in applying science and utilizing technologies that distance them from direct experience of the world. Even a wheeled vehicle, right? Yes, it's useful, but why is it useful? It's useful for moving objects, right? But actually, Dave, that's a really good example. Arwen in the carriage, right? You'd think, well, surely Arwen would need a carriage, right? This is a big deal. Except, notice the implications of that, right? Like, she must ride in a carriage. Why would she ride in a carriage? What is riding in a carriage? Riding in a carriage is like sitting in a box so that what? You can pretend to be not, right? So you can travel without being exposed to the elements, so that you can use the labor of horses without having any connection to the horse, without even being aware that the horse is there, right? Right. Why would you do that? Why would you want that, right? To be sheltered from the elements? Why? Wouldn't you want to be in touch with the elements? Like, the elements are part of Arda, right? This is part of the experience. This is what, again, as we were talking about before a few weeks back, I don't think that the Noldor would make ways to protect themselves from the rain. They would make clothes that looked even more gorgeous when it rained. Like the idea, Noldor rain gear would not be to keep the water off of them. It would be to take advantage of the water and the opportunities that water presents, right? Right. Yeah. Anyway, so.
By the way, hey, Corey.
Yeah.
So I think we lost Trish.
Oh, did we lose Trish?
I now also must bow out.
Oh, no. Okay. All right. Thank you for the warning there. Thank you for the warning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that I don't just ghost you.
Yeah. No.
So.
No problem.
Good topic. We didn't get to casting, or at least the segment that I was a part of.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're going to get to casting, but that's okay. We'll do casting next time.
It doesn't seem very likely. And I'm sorry that I won't get to help finish out this topic, because I think we're on to something. It's.
I think so too. Do you have any final opinions on whether he should wear a prosthetic of any kind?
I think I'm against. I don't really see why. I agree that he wouldn't do it for adornment, and it's unclear that it would serve any kind of functional purpose. I don't think he needs it for wielding a sword or a weapon. And I suppose maybe if he could have an attachment to help him fire a bow if he really wanted to. But I think I'm against, and I also like. I think we're sort of have the inkling of a general principle to explain kind of the Elvish attitude toward quote unquote technology, and why there's simple contraptions that they don't have that they sort of seems like they would have. That I think you're right that there is kind of a resistance to having devices mediate between the person and sort of the environment or the world. Now, of course, the tricky thing I think will be explaining the wide range of obvious exceptions to that, like clothing.
Right. Right.
So,
yes.
I like this idea.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Why aren't?
But it's fine. I mean, Tolkien's full of contradictions. But I think
culture is full of contradictions. Like real cultures are full of contradictions. Yeah.
True. Yeah. So I like this idea though. So.
Okay.
So cool. All right, I'll go out on that note.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep. Have fun.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll continue for a little bit. We'll do this, and there's one more simple question afterwards, which we'll do, and then we'll leave the casting for our next time. But yeah, no. As principles go, I think that this stuff all makes sense. And again, to me, it's really valuable. I think this is a thing that's going to come up on many different occasions, and especially as we're thinking about this is going to be a major issue next year. As we're thinking about really beginning to side by side look at the differences between human culture and human outlook and Elvish culture and Elvish outlook. So I think we've made actually a lot of strides this season in thinking through more what Elvish culture is like and how it differs from human culture. But anyhow, on the specific prosthetic question, I'm now trying to think about if we having worked out these general principles, is there any clear-cut application of those principles to this issue of Maedhros' prosthetic? Do we have reason to think, given if we accept the kind of cultural framework that we're kind of establishing here, this framework of stewardship over dominion and not distancing oneself from direct interaction with Arda within reason, with acknowledging Dave's exception of clothes. I think that I actually don't think that the prosthetic question is clear cut in one way or the other as far as those particular principles are concerned. Using some kind of mechanical, by which I just mean non-aesthetic. So there are two categories of prosthetic he could have, right? A purely aesthetic one of some kind and a functional one. And obviously one could have both, but those would be the two reasons to make a prosthetic, right? For function or for show. And I can imagine arguments. I think I could make arguments for any of the three options, right? One for show, one for function, or none. I think I could make arguments for all three of those that would fit within our overall schema here. It's not about dominating nature because it's himself, right? It's not like a labor-saving device because it's just like enabling him to continue interacting with the world like in something closer to the way that he did before. So that doesn't seem to violate any of those things. Yeah. I have no problem, Marie and Halstein, with, like, in battle, if he needs a shield, like, he could do whatever he needs to do, right? I mean, if I can absolutely imagine somebody designing like a custom shield for Maedhros, which he's able to strap on to his stump, right? Strap onto his to his arm in a particular way. That all makes perfect sense to me. And that doesn't even seem to me to be controversial, really. Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, in a sense, to design a special shield which Maedhros can use without a hand seems to me an extension of the principle that says, if I'm designing a helmet for you, I'm going to make it to fit your head, right? So they're making a shield to fit Maedhros' arm, which happens to not have a hand, right? So they're gonna make it fit. They're gonna make it work. So that doesn't seem to me. I don't even feel like that's a sort of a question at all. The question would just be, not on the battlefield, but, and when we see Maedhros hanging out with, Fingolfin, when what's her name, Thuringwethil, is spying on them, as we discussed in episode 4, I think, and they're just hanging, right? What's Maedhros' arm? William, I agree. We do need to think about what would motivate him, right? Because, of course, you could make arguments for or against any of our 3 possibilities based on what the motivation would be. The number one thing I think I would argue against would be concealment out of embarrassment, right? And I'm not, of course, saying that that's bad. I mean, someone in our world who loses a limb and dislikes having people stare at them, that is totally legit, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I can only imagine what an issue that would be, and if I am totally sympathetic to that motivation, but I don't think it fits Maedhros. And certainly not in these circumstances. I cannot. That's the thing that I have the hardest time imagining is Maedhros wanting to downplay his mutilation. I think that if anything, he would upplay it. I'm not saying he would upplay it. I'm not saying he would wave it in people's faces all the time. I can imagine a circumstance in which he would wave it in somebody's face. But I certainly don't think he would have any desire to conceal it. So that motivation seems to me not fitting at all with the character of Maedhros as we've conceived him and as he's described in the book. Other motivations. Bree says, such a change comes over him at this point in the story. He would own his mistakes here that led to him losing his hand. Absolutely. If there is any shame in it, because one could imagine shame associated with it here. That is shame that he fell into the trap, right? He was duped when he was taken prisoner. He was not just overcome in battle. He was duped and taken. There's, I think, perhaps some shame there, but Bree, exactly. He's going to own that now, right? And he's going to be really focused. So, Marie, thinking about purely practical things, there will be some things that he can't do with one hand. Yes, he can wield his sword more deadly with his left than he used to with his right. But that doesn't mean he can do up his own buttons anymore, right? If he doesn't have something. As Marie points out, would he rely on others to help him with things? And again, to me, the question is, what would he do and why? What fits his personality and his sort of place in the story, like where he is in his place in the story? What would fit him best? I agree, Robert. I mean, he's likely to have, body servants anyway. The fact that he needs somebody to button his buttons for him doesn't seem like a difficulty, honestly. I guess I'm thinking of this question in 2 different ways to myself. One is there something that, other than fighting with a sword and strapping a shield to his stump, is there anything that he would want to do that would necessitate him, that would lead to mounting a tool on his arm of some kind, right? or part of me, when I think of the way in which Maedhros just like burns with a flame after this, like as he is one who has come back from the dead, what does that mean exactly? That he was as one who returns from the dead. I would think, when I imagine Maedhros for that reason, like because of that passage, I imagine somebody who is not necessarily ascetic, but somebody who is much less focused on like the mundane things of the world than most of the rest of people, I would think that Maedhros would be less concerned with convenience than anybody. I mean, do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? I don't know if that fits everybody's picture. Tony, I agree, like, making things is obviously something that's important for elves, and Maedhros, if he loses that, that's bad. I mean, if he abandons being a maker, that's like a fall, right? And I don't think we want to show I don't think we want to show him fallen, Maedhros fallen. I don't think we want to show him like twisted by his experience in that way. I think Tony, I think I always have imagined him. I've never really articulated this to myself, but Tony just asks, so he'd be kind of like a warrior monk. I think I've actually kind of always imagined him like that. And the reason I've always imagined him like that is that the thing that the Silmarillion emphasizes about his life afterwards is fighting, right? Like the training montage, right? That's like the one time I'm invited to picture Maedhros doing something other than being involved in larger strategic questions. But I'm not necessarily saying that we actually depict him as a warrior monk. I think he should still make things, but I think that in his making of things... All right, the more I think about it, the more I am going to come down... The more I'm coming down on the side of no prosthetic other than the special shield that's been made for him. I'm coming down the side of no prosthetic. And the reason I'm coming down on the side of no prosthetic is that I see Maedhros... Bree, it's sort of connected to what you were saying about him owning his mistakes and things like that. There would be some things that he can't do or has a very hard time doing, but I would think that he would own that as well, like that he would accept the limitations, and his focus would be on not on how can I create a substitute for my right hand, but how can I, just as he went on with his sword, right? To learn, he taught himself the sword with his left hand. He's going to teach himself other things with his left hand as well. And he's not necessarily going to stop making things, but he is going to do things that he can do with his left hand. So, maybe he also, we don't get the training montage with it, but he also teaches himself to paint with his left hand, for instance, like that kind of thing. And if there was, an art or, an undertaking of some kind that he is now it's now physically impossible for him to do, he would do without. That seems to me to fit Maedhros much better. Again, he's not trying to resume normal life, right? He's not trying to get back to his life as it was before Thangorodrim. He is building a new life post Thangorodrim. And his missing hand is not only a part of that life, it is like the reminder, right? It is central to that new life, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hallstein is saying that, Yeah, I've seen people with only one hand do more than many or even they themselves would think that they could do. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, some of the things that he is able to accomplish with his left hand only should be, I mean, people can even comment on it, right? I mean, that could even be a thing that we work in, to sort of show he will work on being the best that he can be with his left hand. But again, I can't, the more I think about it, the less I can see him wanting some kind of mechanical substitute of one kind or another, whether it be functioning or, whether it be, something like a magic robot hand, or whether it be even just a simple tool mounted on his hand, on his arm. I don't see him wanting that. I see him, sort of refining himself, his new self, there. And yes, Ethelot, I do think it would be there for all to see. I don't think he would hide it. Especially since, remember, Maedhros, one of his roles is military, right? And he is on the, remember there's the spectrum among the elves, right? Some who just kind of want to get on with things and aren't really focused on the war side of things, and others who are very much focused on the war, and Maedhros is near the extreme, right, on that side. So yes, he's going to want a reminder, and a visual reminder, like not for himself exclusively, but a reminder for others, right, that of what's there, right? Yeah. No, and I do see your comments there, but again, I to me, that I don't feel like that fits with Maedhros' character. The thing that's emphasized in the text is his transformation, right? He is different. Like, that's the main thing. He is different. He is as one who returns from the dead, which, by the way, is a phrase I've always, I'm not saying I know exactly what that means, because I've never been sure that I have understood what that means. But the one thing I do understand about it is that it's a big deal, right? It's a major change. Anyway, yeah, I think, because for him it's not just, Ellen, it's not just a personal trauma, right? That's not Maedhros. I don't think that's Maedhros' relationship with his stump at all. I don't think he is thinking about, it's not a PTSD issue for Maedhros. I don't think that's not the point at all. The point is that his response to his maiming, his response to his captivity, he is changed. He is galvanized. He is activated by that. He defers to Fingolfin. He is one of the most passionate of the opponents of, he is very willing, right, that the full force of Morgoth's, the brunt of Morgoth's assault should fall upon him and upon his people, right? That's the kind of person that Maedhros is afterwards. He is focused, right? This has been a transformative moment for him, and I think not a purely negative one in either sense, in the sense that it was purely bad. Like, he has made a good thing of it in his life. And also not merely negative in the sense of being an absence, right? It is a presence. It is a positive thing in his life in that way. Yeah, Robert, you're right. He's very different from from the other one-handed man who returns from the dead. You're right. No relation. Yeah. Good. Okay. Excellent. Good. Let's go to that last issue, which I don't plan to spend nearly so much time talking about because it's not such a big question. The size of the eagles. So this is one of those really interesting moments, right? Where if we depict what the text literally says, it's going to be a little bit challenging. The published Silmarillion says that Thorondor's wingspan is 30 fathoms. It's 180 feet. 55 meters from wingtip to wingtip is Thorondor. And that means he's just a little bit smaller than a Boeing 747. That is absolutely enormous. Right now, Thorondor absolutely can be absolutely enormous, but I can understand the thrust of the question. Like, do we really want to make Thorondor this big? Do we want to literally use that measurement? If so, when he is carrying someone, that person is going to be invisible, right? That person is going to look like a tick on the side of the eagle, right? Now, obviously, visually speaking, that doesn't seem to me to be a good look. You know, now, Bree, Melvin, you have cautioned me in the past, and I want to recall it here. There have been many times in the past when I've said, "Oh, that's going to look ridiculous," right? And you have said, give the visual artists a chance, right? Before I dismiss something as necessarily looking stupid, give the visual artists a chance to actually see if they can depict it without it looking stupid. So I'm sensible of that here. But this question of pure scale seems to me rather a different question. If he's 180 feet in wingspan, that means that Thorondor, when landed on the ground, is bigger than a barn. Or like at least the size of a barn. That's really big. Do we want him that big? And Bree says just draw it to measurement and then pull back until it looks good. Exactly, right. So I'm trying to think about that. Well, let's go with giant birds that we know. The eagles in Peter Jackson's film looked pretty good, but they're pretty small. What would you say the wingspan of the Peter Jackson eagles are? I'm picturing Gandalf riding on the back of one of the eagles. The wingspan, many times Gandalf's height. Probably at least 30 feet. Yeah, Tony was thinking 30 feet. That's what I was just thinking too. Yeah. I would be fine with him being bigger than that. But because Thorondor should stand out. I mean, Thorondor should... What's the role of... hang on, here I am making the question bigger. Well, Marie, I agree. Yeah, so let's think of Thorondor's jobs. What are Thorondor's jobs? And by this, I don't mean what is the role that has been allotted to him by Manwë. I mean, what are his jobs in the narrative? When does he appear and what does he do when he does appear? Carry Maedhros and Fingon back to the camp, as we've already, that's how he appears in this season. We need him to assist in ferrying Beren and Luthien back to Doriath, of course. We need him to attack Morgoth's face, Marie, as you say. Yeah, and Robert, it's the face one that I'm having the hardest time Imagine, first of all, carrying Fingolfin's body is another one, of course, Marie. What size would the claw, with the talon, like with the feet of an eagle that big be? I mean, how hard would it be for him to pick up a body if he's that? I mean, he's huge. He's huge. Yeah. So he can't, if he were that big, I mean, if he were that big, he'd have a hard time picking up anybody. And again, that would look like him picking up an ant, right? Or at least like it wouldn't even look like, if you imagine a large eagle, like a bald eagle. We used to have a lot of bald eagles down in Delaware where I lived. There were some that lived not far from my house, actually. I'd see them all the time flying. I once hit one with my car, almost. I come around the corner, and there's one perched on, a bald eagle perched on roadkill in the middle of the road. And he barely took off. I almost hit him with my little car. My son's car now. So, bald eagles are big. If you imagine a bald eagle carrying a mouse, right? I mean, that would be tiny in the foot of a bald eagle, but yet proportionally that would still be bigger, wouldn't it, than a human in the claws of an eagle as big as a 747. So yeah, it can't be that big. And to attack Morgoth's face, how tall do we want Morgoth to be? You know, as Robert says, you know, if he's the size of a 747, you just come and crush Morgoth, right? I mean, Morgoth can be very tall, but Morgoth can't be that tall if he's fighting Fingolfin. I mean, Fingolfin's got to at least, I mean, I know Fingolfin's only hitting his feet, but still, like, we've got to think about that scene too, you know, and I don't think we want to make... What height would you put Morgoth at? I think if he's 3 to 5 times Fingolfin's height, it would be okay. But if he's 10 times Fingolfin's height or more, it's going to be harder to take it seriously as a duel. I don't think... Yeah, I mean, it depends on how Jack the Giant Killer we want to get with Fingolfin there. Exactly, Robert. Yeah, he hits his feet when he's being when the foot's on his neck, right? But the other wounds could be higher up. I agree. Somewhere between 3 and 5, maybe 2 and 5 times as tall as Fingolfin. I'd be fine with a 15 to 20 foot Morgoth, actually, really. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, exactly. 18 to, or even, yeah. Even lower than 18. I could see a 15-foot Morgoth. I mean, that would still be. It would give the impression of a very. We have to establish Fingolfin as the very clear underdog, but we don't want to make him look like a bug that can just be squished. Yeah. So again, if Morgoth is 15 to 20 feet tall maximum, then there is no way that Thorondor can have a 180-foot wingspan, right? And he would be taller. Like, standing on the ground, he would be taller than Morgoth. You know, and then you'd get, like, Thorondor comes down and he's like, come over here and say that, right? And that's just not the right dynamic for that fight. Yeah, so if Morgoth is 15 to 20 feet tall, Thorondor has to... Now, when I imagine him scratching at his face, I don't imagine him like the size of his face, just like scratching at it, right? I mean, he's attacking his face because his face is the part that's highest up, and of course he's like making him duck and back away. But wingspan, his wingspan obviously can be more than the height of Morgoth, right? Because that his body is much smaller than his wingspan. So he needs to be smaller than Morgoth, though. That's a tough balance, because I don't want Morgoth to be that big, but I want Thorondor to be that small. I mean, I agree, Tony, with your estimate that the Peter Jackson Eagles look to be about 30-foot wingspan or so. And I wouldn't... Certainly, Thorondor obviously can't be smaller than that. I mean, those eagles look barely large enough to carry humans, right? Thorondor has to be much more ample than that. Yeah. Yeah, if he had something like twice that, if he had a 60-foot wingspan, how large would his body be then? So 60 feet wingspan, that's... His body would be larger. An eagle with a 60-foot wingspan, standing on the ground, would be taller than a human, but shorter than Morgoth. Okay, good. Bree said she was just doing the math, and she's getting 35 to 40-foot wings as well for the Peter Jackson Eagles. Okay. So, yeah, well, Robert, we'll get to Ancalagon the Black. I'm not making Ancalagon the Black as big as a mountain range. That ain't happening. Nor do I think, by the way, that that's what that description means. Yes, he's described as breaking the mountain when he falls, but so is the Balrog. I don't think that that's what that description means. And I know that some people use that description of Ancalagon's fall to imagine that Ancalagon must be larger than mountains himself, and I do not, like that he squished the mountains when he fell on them, and I do not believe that at all. That is to say, when I say I don't believe that, I mean I don't think that's what is being described in that. I think they're misreading that passage. But anyway, that's a decision for another time. We won't get to winged dragons for a while. Though we do have to think about the size of Glaurung eventually as well here. Okay, so Tony thinks a 60-foot wingspan would mean about a 20-foot body length, including the tail. That's big. That is a big, big bird. Yeah. Because even then, that would have him... that would have him in Morgoth's weight class, basically. But at the same time, maybe I'm okay with that. Maybe I'm okay with the fact that Thorondor kind of looks like he might be able to take Morgoth. It would certainly increase the sense of eucatastrophe when he intervenes, right? Not to mention his role. Thorondor is the greatest of all of the eagles. He should be very much bigger than the rest of them. If he's 60-foot wingspan, the others should be like 45, right? I mean, like Gwaihir and Landreval and Meneldor should be like 45-foot wingspan max, maybe 30. Thorondor should be very significantly larger than the other great birds. Cool. Awesome. Ethelwald says that Weta gives the wingspan of Gwaihir as 31 feet, 950 centimeters. So, okay, there we go. Excellent. Good. Okay, yeah. So he would stand about 12 feet high when he was landed. So that Gwaihir's eye level would be about 12 feet up. So if he were on the ground with his wings, folded, Morgoth would look down on him. Morgoth would have several feet on him, and with armor and weapons and looking mean, right? When he's in the air and swooping down on him, Thorondor would be genuinely threatening to Morgoth. Would certainly appear generally threatening, and that seems to me good, inasmuch as Thorondor is the agent of, is the agent of Manwë, right? I mean, the Eagles of the Lords of the West, right? That's Thorondor's job title, right? So when he comes swooping in, it should look imposing, even to Morgoth, even compared to Morgoth personally, it should look imposing. And that seems to me to fit it. 60-foot wingspan, 20-foot body length in the air, 12-foot standing height. Morgoth is, say, 15 feet, maybe go all the way up to the 18 or 20 feet for Morgoth, so that Morgoth would still tower over him when they were both standing. If Morgoth is 20 feet high, that would put... So Fingolfin would stand... If they're standing next to each other, Fingolfin would... His head would come up to what, like mid-thigh on Morgoth? That works, right? It works for me because, again, it's an obvious mismatch, but Fingolfin could still stab up towards the vitals, right? I mean, you get the sense of like it's a possible fight. Even though not a likely win, Again, serious underdog situation. That would create, I think, the right level of grandeur when Thorondor is like coming back. I'm imagining that wonderful scene that we were describing at the end of episode 1, right? Where he comes swooping in, bearing Fingolfin, who is holding Maedhros, right? And that would look cool, I think, and imposing. Yeah. I think that works. Yeah, Bree, I agree. As Bree says, visually with Morgoth, he's not a very mobile character when he's in Beleriand. His appearance is more of a metaphor at that point, so such a crazy height works there. Yeah, we're not going to normally have... I mean, remember we talked about this in Season 1. How tall are the Valar? Didn't we make them, like, no more than half again as tall as the elves? We made them not even so much. Obviously of a slightly different scale, but not, like, twice the height of the elves. His own physical form will have changed to reflect his own warped mindset at that point. And, his, physical size there would be, I agree, Bria, sort of an apt projection of that concept, right? I think that works. Okay. Cool. All right. I think 60 is a good... So 1/3 the size of Thorondor in the published text. Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. As I said, we're not going to do casting this time. We'll do casting next time. So very good. So just a quick reminder. I'll go past our casting screen here. Just a quick reminder. Next time, our next date will be Thursday, June 20th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. New time, as I said. So for those of you who are with us live, remember, will be many apologies to all the Europeans again who will be asleep. I'm sorry about that. This is a necessary change. And of course, our topic for discussion on June 20th will be episodes 7 and 8, which includes the Kinslaying reveal, Thingol's ban, and the spell of bottomless dread. Lots of fun stuff to talk about there in episodes 7 and 8. Thank you so much, everybody. Oh, cool. And Halcyon worked out the scale of a mouse to a golden eagle's wingspan is a factor of about 20. Yeah, good. So in order to look like a mouse in a golden eagle's wingspan, something 3 feet long would look like a mouse. Good. Okay, so it would look larger than a mouse if he's 60 feet. It would look like a rat. Instead, it would look like a golden eagle holding a rat, which is fine, actually. Like that's much better. Cool. Awesome. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate your being with me. Sorry for the channel. Sorry for those of you who are listening live for messing up the link before. But we will see you guys next time. Thanks for listening, and Godspeed. Although the theoretical budget of our hypothetical blockbuster may be unlimited, the production budgets of this and the rest of our fun alternative educational projects are unfortunately not. If you have enjoyed joining our production team, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.